When people look back at Nazi Germany, they often ask one question: how did this happen? How did an entire nation follow a man who was quietly preparing for the most destructive war in human history while promising peace? To understand that, you don't start with tanks or soldiers. You start with emotions, with fear, with hope. In 1933, Germany was broken. The economy was crushed, unemployment was everywhere, and the wounds of World War I were still open. Millions were dead, and millions more felt humiliated. People didn't want another war. They wanted dignity. They wanted stability. That's where Adolf Hitler came in. He didn't present himself as a dictator or a conqueror. He presented himself as someone who understood the pain of ordinary Germans, someone who promised to rebuild the country without bloodshed, someone who spoke endlessly about unity, pride, and belonging. He sold Germans an idea, a powerful one, the idea of a national community, a place where everyone who truly belonged would be valued. And people believed him. But there was a darker side to this promise, because from the very beginning, Hitler made one thing clear: not everyone belonged. There was an invisible line. On one side were real Germans. On the other were those he labeled as outsiders, especially the Jews. At first, it didn't feel violent. It felt ideological, quiet, almost reasonable to some. But once people accepted the idea that some neighbors mattered less than others, the door was open. By the mid-1930s, Hitler could proudly point to what looked like success. Unemployment was falling fast, big projects like highways were underway, factories were reopening. Germany looked like it was finally standing on its feet again. Supporters cheered and said he kept his promise. What most people didn't see was what was happening behind the scenes. Germany wasn't just recovering, it was rearming, quietly, systematically, and on a massive scale. While propaganda posters talked about jobs and progress, billions were being poured into weapons, tanks, guns, planes, ammunition. Far more money than was spent on social welfare or public programs. For Hitler, this wasn't optional. He believed war was unavoidable. In his mind, communism, especially the Soviet Union, was a mortal enemy. He saw it not just as a political threat, but as part of a global conspiracy. And he believed Germany needed more land, more resources, more space to survive. But here was the problem. Germans had voted for peace. The memories of World War I were still raw. Millions had died. No one wanted to repeat that nightmare. So Hitler did something clever. He never called it preparation for war. He called it restoring national honor. When he rebuilt the army and reintroduced conscription in open defiance of the Treaty of Versailles, he framed it as self-defense, as pride, as correcting past injustices. And when nothing happened, when Britain and France didn't stop him, his confidence grew. Each step he took without consequences taught him the same lesson. The world would hesitate, and Germans would follow. But rearmament came at a cost. Wages stayed low, working hours increased, consumer goods became scarce, life became harder for ordinary people. The dream of prosperity started to crack. Hitler knew this, and he was worried. So he asked his propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, to secretly monitor public opinion. Agents listened to conversations in shops, on trains, in queues. The reports were troubling. Support was not as solid as it appeared. The regime needed a distraction, a target. And once again, the Jews became that target. In 1935, new laws were announced that changed daily life forever. Jews lost citizenship. Marriage between Jews and Germans was banned. People were classified by bloodlines, by grandparents, by ancestry. Suddenly, neighbors became legal outsiders. What's chilling isn't just the cruelty of these laws, it's how normal they became. Most Germans accepted them. Some supported them. Few openly resisted. Step by step, society was being trained to believe that racial purity mattered more than human rights. Then came another gamble. In 1936, Hitler sent troops into the Rhineland, an area Germany was forbidden to militarize. His generals were terrified. If France reacted, Germany wasn't ready. But France didn't react. Neither did Britain. German soldiers marched in, unopposed. The country erupted in celebration. Hitler was suddenly seen not just as a leader, but as a genius, someone who took bold risks and won without bloodshed. And then came Austria. German troops crossed the border, and crowds welcomed them with cheers. No war, no fighting, just applause. Once again, Hitler looked unstoppable. Inside the German military, some men were alarmed. They believed Hitler was rushing the nation toward disaster. Some even considered removing him by force. But history moved faster than they did. In 1938, Hitler turned his attention to Czechoslovakia. He claimed that ethnic Germans living there were being oppressed. Nazi propaganda flooded the airwaves. Stories of abuse and persecution spread. Britain's Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain believed he could avoid war through negotiation. He flew to meet Hitler, confident that reason would prevail. He underestimated him. Hitler shouted, raged, and threatened invasion. He faked reports of violence. He applied pressure until Chamberlain broke. The result was the Munich Agreement. Hitler was given the Sudetenland in exchange for a promise that this would be his final demand. Germany celebrated. People believed peace had been saved. Behind closed doors, conspirators burned their plans. They had lost hope. And within months, Hitler tore the agreement apart. In March 1939, German troops occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia. This time, there was no excuse, no ethnic Germans to protect, no moral justification. This was pure conquest. Still, the world hesitated, until September. On September 1st, 1939, German forces invaded Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war. Hitler's promise of peace collapsed. World War II began. At first, Germany seemed unstoppable. Poland fell quickly. France collapsed. Paris was occupied. Hitler stood victorious beneath the Eiffel Tower, convinced he was the greatest strategist in history. Many Germans who had doubted him began to believe again. But what they didn't realize was this: every lie, every promise, every bloodless victory had been building towards something far darker. The illusion was over, and the real cost was only beginning. History teaches us something uncomfortable. Tyranny doesn't always arrive with violence. Sometimes it arrives with hope and applause. If you want to understand how this story continues and where these choices ultimately led, make sure you stay with this channel. And tell me in the comments, at what moment do you think this could have been stopped? Because once people stop questioning power, power stops pretending.